So the proposal is that in terms of the educational process that we now want to talk about, that there is a massive shift occurring in education, driven by the practical necessities of business, driven by the more profound understandings of human well-being sciences, and participated in by research into education, that our society is going through a shift in which we could characterize that the job of education in the past was to produce knowers. For hundreds of years, for thousands of years, we've been oriented towards producing knowers. And that now the shift is, no, we need to steward learners. The business doesn't need people that can say, well, they know this, they know this, they know this, and they have these skills. They need that, but that's only part of it. That's insufficient in itself. What business is saying is, no, we need people whose ongoing capacities for learning is what we use to differentiate them. That if it comes down to, for example, the 5 of you are coming to apply for a job, right? And you've all got similar resumes with respect to your past experiences and what you know and your degrees and your credentials. The question for me as an employer is going to be, which one of your ongoing capacities for learning is most alive right now? Right? What you know will be, that's, okay, insufficient. I mean, sufficient, but not in itself determining. It's going to be your ongoing capacities for learning. Now, when education starts to be concerned with that, as opposed to what are your credentials in the static state, it requires an inversion, a shift in priorities of the system, and a shift in terms of the kind of environments we design to facilitate people when that's our objective. Simply stated, I would say that whereas in the past education has viewed our individual capacities for learning as if it was the means or utilities through which knowledge, skills, and experience is gained, it's like it was the vehicle. Our capacities for learning were vehicular. I think that the shift could be characterized that in the future, knowledge, skills, and experiences that we set up are going to be the vehicles for extending our capacities for learning. It's very simple, but it's 180 degrees out. It's what a good teacher already does, but it's what systemically we're insensitive to. That kind of makes that what we're doing is looking at subject material as if it was a gymnasium, that a class or a field of subject material is a piece of exercise equipment. It's not that we're not interested in subject mastery, but we're saying that subject mastery is kind of a implicit consequence of somebody who's exercising their capacities in that field. But exercising their capacities isn't necessarily an implicit consequence of somebody who's becoming knowledge specific in that field. So I don't know whether it's clear, but this pivot between knower and learner and its implications for the way that we relate to learners is really critical. And I think that, at least in terms of what we want to talk about, it's pivotal. Going back kind of to the cycle of engagement piece, and I'm going to move along and be in technology pretty shortly, I want to say that the most important thing that we can do in the learner is help them be able to differentiate, understand, sense, and employ their own meaning needs, their own learning needs. And that, in fact, let me jump ahead to this question, which is one of my favorite questions in getting at this. If learners can't trust their own learning and meaning needs as the compass with which to orient themselves through their research-based or curriculum-driven learning experiences, who's learning? What's learning? And if that's in fact what we're most concerned with, is that the individuals have a growing capacity to use themselves as learners, learn to participate in their learning experience, because ultimately that's what a learner is distinct from a knower, somebody who's a participant in their learning process, then what does that require of an environment to allow the learners to be able to become sensitive to their learning needs? I mean, we wouldn't learn to walk in space without the firmness of the ground and gravity and all the rest of it, we wouldn't have any feedback from which to learn how to extend ourselves into our own bodies to walk. Without the way that water works similarly, we wouldn't learn to swim. And without an education system that's designed to respond to people's learning needs and meaning needs at the level we're talking about, we won't learn to be learners. We'll talk about it, but we won't change that fundamental possibility of participation in meaning needs, which are critical for somebody becoming more learning oriented. So I want to finalize this stage by saying that, again, in business, in education, in individual well-being, there's this pressure, practical and profound, coming to this kind of squeeze on us all and say, we need individuals and organizations which are more learning-oriented. And that towards becoming more learning-oriented, if we take the various research work that's been done in education, we necessarily have to become more individualized in the process. But the question that we're putting before you now is, what does individualizing mean? And the proposition is that what we're individualizing is each learner's ability to use themselves, to learn how to employ themselves differently in the learning process. It's not just individualizing instruction, which make the torpedo work better. It's make the swimming pool work better so that they can learn to swim better, while at the same time becoming subject masters. And that the only way that we can accomplish this is through relationships we'd characterize as mutually learning oriented. If the spirit of our intention as educators isn't to learn how to construct environments with these qualities, they won't come to exist. So, to put it in a sentence, and a clumsy one at that, what we're interested in might be characterized as toward a learning-oriented subjectivity through mutually learning-oriented relations, meaning that as educators, as educator system people, that there's nothing that could be more practical nor profound an aspiration that we could carry towards our students, our charges, the people whom we're responsible for, than that they become subjectively, more pervasively learning-oriented in terms of how they relate to their own experiences, to other people, to knowledge, and that there's no way we could ever evolve environments that are responsive enough for them to be able to do that unless co-equal to our instructional intentions, our intention is to learn to do so. Now, a piece of technology that we've developed that, a series of technologies actually, but only a couple of which I'm going to show you, which are intended to get at this, demonstrate this. This, that's really cut off. This is the learner interface. Everybody here is familiar with a Macintosh, so I'll take a second and kind of leverage off of your experience with a Macintosh. The learner interface was designed to basically take all of the conventions of computing and set them aside, except one, the idea of a highly leverageable user interface. Except our concern wasn't a user interface, it was a learner interface. Rather than the metaphor of a desktop, despite all of its powers, what we said was, given the different kinds of meaning needs, learning needs that learners can have as they drive through learning experiences, what qualities of interface should we support? What qualities of interface do we really want to make transparent to the way that the machine interfaces educational content, instructional content, and learners? So what you're looking at is a learner interface. It's done in HyperCard. The deep data processing components of it are not in HyperCard. They're all a series of X commands en route to being an application. But HyperCard is the surface level interface tool that we're using.